Welcome to the Investor Summit Green Room, the behind-the-scenes monthly podcast where we bring you informal one-to-one interviews, panel discussions and presentations with leading CEOs, fund managers and financial journalists, which we hope lead you to make better investing decisions.
Do please take note, the views expressed in the Investor Summit Green Room podcast are for information purposes only, and nothing in this podcast constitutes a financial promotion, investment advice, or indeed personal recommendation.
Today we're delighted to welcome Will Whitehorn, Chairman at Seraphim Space Investment Trust. Will is a visionary space tech entrepreneur who's been involved with the space industry for decades. His latest space tech venture is Seraphim, ticker SSIT, otherwise known as Seraphim Space Investment Trust, which is described often as the world's first listed space tech fund. Welcome to the Green Room.
Thank you.
Well, it's a complete pleasure to have you here. So, where do we kick off, I wonder? Shall we take you to your early days with Virgin, where you were Richard Branson's right-hand man, and then Virgin Galactic?
We could go even earlier.
Does your interest in space go further back than that?
You know, I was at a school reunion in Scotland a year and a half ago, and I was presented by an old friend, David Brown, who I'd been at school with, who I hadn't seen since I was 16, 17. And he presented me with a copy of EA Journal from 1972. I was 12 years old. And my articles every month I wrote, The Spaceship of the Future was one of the articles I wrote. And it was about an air-launched spaceship of the future made of new technology materials to be much cheaper to operate than the big rockets that NASA's got. So I didn't even remember that I'd written that at the age of 12, but it's almost exactly what we ended up doing at Virgin Galactic all those years later in the 1990s.
And what was it like working with Richard Branson and being president of Virgin Galactic? That's quite a big deal.
Well, Richard is a visionary. He is somebody who's got pretty severe ADHD. And as a result of that, he sees the simplicity in what we all see as very complex things. And he could understand from what he'd learned about aviation technology in transportation and what he'd learned about the new technology materials like carbon composites, that spaceships were not being built the right way. That was where Elon and he completely agreed. And they both had an idea about reusability. So they were obsessed, both of them, with reusability and new technology materials. And Richard obviously inspired the development of the Virgin Galactic Spaceship 2, the newest iteration of which is about to start operating. And I was privileged enough to start the project off for him and get the first spaceship built in the Mojave Desert. It's not often in your life you can say, I got the first spaceship built in the Mojave Desert. So it was a great time. And, you know, he is somebody who is I still see him every now and then, and tragically his wife died last December, and in fact I'm seeing him next to a memorial, which is a celebration of Joan Branson's life that he's having shortly. And I think that he could see what Elon and Jeff Bezos could all see, that you couldn't carry on putting 1950s and 60s space technology expensively into space, charging hundreds of thousands of dollars for every kilo you got up there, and that all the technology that had been developed in the private sector, in everything from Sky Television right the way across to Inmarsat, and the new generation of satellites that were looking like they'd be available soon, that could all be got into space much more cheaply, and you could even get people into space very cheaply, and they could do all sorts of things up there that they hadn't been able to do before. And that was what inspired those entrepreneurs, and it inspired me to carry on working in space when I handed over the Galactic project in 2010 to the ex-chief of staff of NASA.
So space tech has broadened, commercialized, and has become available for private investors. So,
yes.
And that's the jump even from, Bezos, Elon Musk, Richard Branson. You don't have to be those people to actually invest in space tech these days.
No.
It's so exciting.
Thousands and thousands of new technology companies that have raised money and are developing cheap solutions to everyday problems, solving them from space. So I think there are two things that have happened. One is an act went through Congress in 2004, which I gave evidence for, called the Commercial Space Launch Amendment Act. That changed the industry because it allowed private space to be developed and regulated in America by the FAA. That then inspired relaxing of regulation in Europe as well, and Japan, and the idea of new space companies being developed. Billions and now trillions have been poured into the industry. And space has become so important to human survival that you can literally say 20% of the population of the planet would not be alive at the moment if it wasn't for space. Because space is responsible for the increase in food production we've managed, along with the things you read about, like genetic modification of food. As importantly, we are now able to operate across the globe producing food and crops that would either have spoiled in ports in the past, which they did before the GPS system became sophisticated and could be tagged to every container. And then tractors, as you can see on Clarkson's farm, can now operate from satellites, operating them without human intervention.
Sure.
And
you don't need the farmer to run a tractor anymore.
And there's a shortage of people who want to do farming, so that works. And on top of that, the crops now in the fields are being monitored from space for disease, so the insurance company in Lloyd's of London can phone up the Brazilian farmer with their 100,000 hectares and say, if you don't fix that problem in the corner of field XY at point Z, then we won't be paying for the insurance when that crop fails. So you better go and sort that now. That can literally be done now.
Gosh. So let me take you back and ask you about the scale of the space tech opportunity. How big is it? You were talking about billions, then trillions.
I mean, space tech is booming for three main reasons. The first reason is defense. The second reason is climate change and the monitoring of it. And the third reason is industrial use, particularly in agriculture, insurance, and the other uses that are growing with the demand. And then AI links into that beautifully because space data is completely accurate. And what mucks up AI more than anything else is old, inaccurate data. So we can get brand new data sets which are 100% accurate in different areas from space and merge those in with the revolution we've got in machine learning at the moment. You get a very sweet spot of demand for new products. Shall I give you an example? One of the best examples at the moment is the largest investment that Seraphim Space Investment Trust has, and that's called ICEYE, a Finnish company. ICEYE originally called because they were going to have an eye on the ice for people like the Swedish government and such like in the past, and the Finnish government, basically looking out for all the things that you couldn't see, because half of the year the ice is in darkness, and most of the rest of the summer it's covered in cloud and fog. So it's not easy to monitor the ice caps. ICEYE used a new idea, basically a synthetic aperture radar. They can see through the clouds and see at night. And lo and behold, they started to get customers in 2019. And then Ukraine happened. And the German government has funded them to provide all the data that Ukraine needs to see the Russians at night and see them under the clouds and see them killing civilians in a village and say, hey, that wasn't the Ukrainians who did that when you were retreating, because we've got the evidence, because we can see at night and through the clouds. And that has been a revolution. And ICEYE has become one of the fastest growing companies in the world. It just raised a 10 billion euro raise, and there is talk that it's going to float for considerably more in the next year or two.
And you say that's part of the Seraphim Fund?
It's one of our biggest investments. Okay. And that's a classic example of a dual-use space company with a new technology idea, i.e. radar from space seeing through the cloud and at night, getting it down to good resolution, and then having lots and lots and lots of customers from across industry, government research, science, climate change, and defense.
Perhaps if I could take you from there to Elon Musk and SpaceX. SpaceX also has had possibly the most exciting IPO this year, possibly for many years. He's a very divisive character, huge positives, huge negatives. Have you ever met Elon Musk? And what's your take on him?
Yes, I have. I actually met him in 2004. Well, you probably won't even remember. In front of Congress, getting the Commercial Space Launch Amendment Act through Congress, doing a congressional hearing or two. And he stated, very similar to the pitch we were giving Congress, this is the future. And NASA were very negative at that time about that future. the idea of the reusable rockets happening within the kind of timescale he was talking about, and the concept of building something big enough that was reusable to go to Mars, they were relatively negative on that idea at the time, and they were relatively negative on Virgin Galactic. And so I watched him then. He was very much more measured. I think now, he has become, a trillionaire. And so he is much more, I think now, not the same person he was then. Then he was quite shy and quite modest, but determined. And I think now his ambition is literally, to Mars and back.
And SpaceX, did you buy the IPO for yourself, for personal use?
Well, I bought 4,000 quid's worth. So not very much. Mainly just to keep an eye on it in the future. Not trying to make a quick buck, which obviously a lot of people have done. There was a lot of people bought into it at 135 and then sold at 227 and brought the price down as they've sold above the IPO price.
And flipped.
But it will settle, that stock, because what they are doing is unique. I mean, you don't have to like Elon Musk to be honest enough to understand that they've revolutionized access to space. And that's affected humanity greatly. They can now get payload up there for customers for hundreds to thousands of dollars instead of millions of dollars for whatever the payload is and the amount. And that is a revolution. And that's caused the industrial revolution that's happening in space. The ICEYE constellation I talked about earlier, launched on SpaceX rockets. Lots of other people's constellations. And what they've also brought about is competition. They forced Arianespace to up their game and produce launch costs which are much lower than they used to be, even if they're not making money from them. And of course, Jeff Bezos is now trying to compete on launch costs and get rocketry into space, which will be in the market. So I see the cost of space launch coming down because of Elon. That's already his biggest contribution to this industrial revolution we're witnessing. When I started in this industry, there were hundreds of satellites up there. By the time I was president of the trade body for space in the UK, and I was on the board of the RAF helping set up Space Command, there were a few thousand satellites up there. By the time Seraphim started, a little bit later, there were still just a few thousand. That was 2021. We're now in 25,000, 30,000, building towards 100,000 satellites in the next 3 to 4 years. It is an absolute, hockey stick revolution.
So tell us a little bit more about Seraphim, SSIT. 24 holdings, growth companies, privately listed. Tell us a wee bit more.
A lot of the stocks that we have are private space growth companies. They're space tech companies. We don't invest in launch. So Seraphim hasn't invested in any of the launch vehicle systems because we are investing in the stuff that is up there in space, earning money doing stuff, and has a good business plan. So this is all very realistic investment that people can get a handle on. And the company has grown enormously. We entered the FTSE 250 a week and a half ago, which has been actually a very proud moment.
Very pleasing moment,
and
I'm
a
sure.
very pleasing moment. And it was, and the 24 investments are mostly unquoted still, but now they're starting to float. So we've had the flotations of Hawkeye 360 just recently, one of our investments. We've had the flotation of Voyager Technologies, which basically is building the new iterations of the International Space Station and other space station type products, and is doing other things in space. We've got ICEYE being rumoured to float. So as the company grows as an investment trust, it will have more quoted stocks in the portfolio. But we don't buy stocks which are already quoted in Seraphim Space Investment Trust. We start them private. Beyond the early growth stage, Seraphim is a private fund that does that, and we sometimes pick and choose some of the companies we like the most from that. And the manager does a very good job of that. There's a team of fund managers who have worked on this stuff since 2015 now. That's when Seraphim started their first private fund, backed by the British Business Bank and Airbus at that time. And that's what we morphed into Seraphim as it is today.
And you just had a placing and raised 137 million, 45 million of which through retail book was done for the retail investor.
That's correct.
That's so interesting. It's 45 million of it from retail. So
Yeah.
that was a huge demand.
It's one of the biggest fundraisers in recent years in the City of London, which is sad for the City of London because we used to be doing bigger stuff than this. But Seraphim has been a successful fundraise. And those shares aren't SSIT. They're called SSIC. They're the C shares. And they are in cash at the moment. And actually, the share price has gone down a bit. So you could be buying 100 pence worth of cash for 78. And I've just bought some again recently after the float.
You buy regularly, Will, don't you?
I do. I've been buying Seraphim with every spare bit of pension that comes in.
Private investors love chairmen like you.
And
You're aligned with their interests.
I am aligned with their interests. For good or bad, I'm there.
For good or bad, you're there.
But it'll
indeed.
be for good because they're doing good things, these companies we're investing in. And the fact is, if SSIC is holding a wodge of cash, we'll call it, the 137 million, and a very clever group of fund managers are now actively investing that in private companies. So the reason it doesn't happen instantly is because those private companies have to be doing a fundraise for you to participate. It's not just like buying stocks on the stock market for this. But in the next couple of months, we will start converting those C shares. Sometime in the late autumn, maybe, we start converting those C shares into the SSIT shares as we fill the SSIC up with new investments. Some of them carry on some SSIT's original investments, some of them new companies, some of them in the other Seraphim fund. It's going to be very exciting. And that's being led by Mark Boggett, who's the chief exec of Seraphim, the investment company, and James Brugger, his colleague, who is really in the charge of bringing those investments. And there'll be announcements that happen during the next couple of months as to what those investments are. And
the C shares and the ordinary shares will end up having more similar value, will they?
They'll morph into one.
Right.
It's a very clever structure.
Standout performers in the current portfolio. You've already mentioned a couple. Anything else?
There's 4 or 5. There's a lot of really exciting new companies.
What are the ones that are on the cusp that you think are good?
That haven't yet grown as much. I'll give you an example. Back into this theme of doing new things from space. We've got a company that's already launched its early satellites and it's in test mode, but going commercial now, called Satellite View. And they do basically stuff from space which is in the infrared spectrum. So they can tell you sort of things like chemical compositions and see in a different way. Then you've got companies doing hyperspectral cameras. You can see every part of the spectrum. You've got companies, Tomorrow.io, Voyager Technologies that I mentioned earlier that's now already floated, Hawkeye 360 that does signal intelligence for, the defense side of things, which is now quoted in American. We have a stake in that. Beyond that, there are just another 20 wonderful companies. And they're all doing stuff.
What kind of sectors broadly? Is it broadly defence, broadly dual use?
It's almost all dual use. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are now getting marketplace with insurance companies. And a lot of them are getting marketplace in the agricultural world, again, through insurance quite often, sometimes direct to very large farming organisations. And, there is a lot of scientific research going on soon that can tap into these commercial companies. They can get new data. So we have science satellites up there, which have often been funded by the UK Space Agency or by ESA. And those satellites, now these commercial satellites can supplement their data sets with all the new stuff that they're doing. So it's such an exciting world. And I think one of the things that I think has inspired me about it is the fact that actually, when it comes down to life on Earth, a lot of the things that are causing us the biggest problems at the moment can now, we know, technologically be done in space. So the next generation of stuff that we'll be looking at is data centers in space. And obviously Elon's already talked about that. I was an early adopter of the concept, but never had the money to do anything about it. So now it's quite fun that we can begin to look at those kind of companies. And beyond that, the next generation will be solar power beamed down from space to the planet. So there are 2 reasons why both these are very exciting. One, data centers, and partly because of AI, are using more and more of the resources of the planet. Half of all Ireland's electricity is feeding data centers that it produces. And the more wind and solar that we produce, the more it gets soaked up and the more the demand for nuclear even is starting to rise again, but the new concepts in nuclear power. And we can't carry on doing that. So being able to put data centers in space where it's absolute zero, so the cold problem can be worked on and dealt with, where you can get unlimited solar power and you can just beam back down using things like microwave radiation or laser communications. You can beam all the data back down. That's a much more sensible long-term way to look at a lot of it. Now, on top of that, space obviously has the sun. The sun is the world's biggest, well, it's the world's fusion reactor. It gives us all the light, the energy, the plants grow and everything else. If we could harness that in space to harness that fusion power directly down to the planet, we'd be on a winner. And that's going to happen in the next 3 years. In the next 3 years, you'll see the first solar farms farming energy from the sun and beaming it down as microwave radiation to the existing places where we're producing renewables. So between every wind turbine offshore in the Dogger Bank, for example, you could put up masts to receive the microwave radiation, and those wind turbines would then have all their infrastructure working 24/7, 365 days a year, even when the wind's not blowing. And you can do the same with solar farms in the UK or Morocco, wherever it is. In Morocco, they get 12 hours daylight and 12 hours night. They don't get as much cloud as we get. We get longer summers and very short daylight winters. Putting microwave receptors up in amongst that means you can use that infrastructure and get microwave radiation from space 24/7. These will be the two big next revolutions that you'll see. Industrialization in space. At the moment, we're going through what I call space industrialization 2.0, and what we're coming next to is 3.0 and 4.0.
In terms of money and clients and so on, does the fact that the defence budgets are going to be increased help? Europe's going to increase. US is pulling out of Europe. So is it a positive for Seraphim in there?
Yes.
And on all your fronts?
One can only say yes.
It's a sweet spot, really.
It's a sweet spot. Because, and also unlike a defence company in the straightforward sense of the word, every business that I've come across, with only a couple of tiny exceptions, is this dual use. And therefore, you can tap into a growing commercial market and demand-led data that people want to do things at this stage. Then there'll be the demand-led power from space and data, actually says in data centers from space. But that will also have military applications at all those levels. So basically, the governments of the Western world need much better satellite communication than they've got at the moment, and they need to get it in a cost-effective way, and they need to use it to manage the future that they're seeing in warfare. If you could, for instance, have drones working directly from satellites, much more than they do today, they still have to be, because you can't get the receiving, transmitting equipment down. And that's one of the other projects I'm working on outside Seraphim.
That sounds very interesting.
A company in Edinburgh called Sofant Technologies.
Tell me about them.
Well, Sofant they're doing an EIS raise at the moment through Wealth Club. And Sofant have developed a microwave Ka band with Ku band use possibilities, phased array MEMS transmitter receiver.
You're looking
system.
Excited, Will. Is that a big deal?
It's a big deal.
It's a big
because
deal.
It works. And people like Raytheon and British Aerospace spent a long time trying to build a chipset like this, and they haven't managed to do it. These folks, the Boffins from Edinburgh University who worked on this, and David Wither, who runs it, who's been dedicated to the... so he was in the US military originally and has now been working in the mobile phone industry before this project. They have come up with a very small, very cost-effective receiver transmitter to bring all of this stuff down from space in the future. And already we've just, having got it through this R&D phase, the commerciality of it I've witnessed since I joined in January has gone from, we're signing contracts now with, the kind of people in countries like Germany who want this stuff.
Yeah, so you've gone from memorandums of understanding to commercial contracts.
To development contracts already.
Okay, so
it's a very exciting business. And there's lots of companies like that in Britain, luckily. Now, too many of them go abroad. I mean, we had a wonderful Seraphim investment called Allspace, and they have been going through a process of being sold to a big American quoted company. And Seraphim will end up a shareholder in that company. But we're sad to lose Allspace because it was one of it's a little bit similar to the company Sofant I just described, with slightly more defence application in one area and less in another area. But they're kind of, they would be in co-opetition, you'd call it. But Allspace is leaving the UK, and that's a shame. And that's because we don't have enough capital in this country that has got enough. I'm a great believer in the idea of adventure capitalism as opposed to venture capitalism. You've got to see a new business area like this as an adventure that is going to take you as an investor to places you've not gone before. And, those who want to hang on for the ride in it, I think are going to get great benefits eventually.
So what's the problem with the UK? Is it the fact that valuations are too low here versus the States, or a lack of funding?
It's the public market side is the real problem. And the LSE is trying to do stuff to fix that, but it's got a legislative background to it. It's got a background in the way pension funds are forced to function to some extent by the myriad of conflicting legislation they face. So I don't blame anybody for this. It's just something that needs fixed, and it's not getting fixed quickly enough. We are losing companies from the UK stock market, which I think is sad. And we are losing businesses that could go to the stock market, like Allspace, which was sold to a company called York Space Systems, which Seraphim will now be a shareholder in the future. And it's just going through its regulatory approval, so it hasn't actually happened yet. But that company, it was sold for $350 million. Well, we could have taken it to the market eventually here. But no, we weren't able to, because we couldn't get the next round of big-scale investment. And to some extent, organisations which are pretty good, like the British Business Bank, have been doing a bit of that. Mm-hmm. But, we need more of that. And government needs to really get a handle on everything it can do to encourage that investment climate. And at the moment, it has not been doing enough. I did a science and technology select committee hearing, which hasn't yet been published, about 3 months ago. But I could have been, the former Defence Secretary, John Healey, speaking. I could have been, Angus Robertson, wasn't it, from NATO, speaking, because I was saying exactly the same things about the fact that this area, which I was talking about, was space, but all of these factors in the investment community mean that we're not getting the follow through, and a lot of these really good companies are going to end up going abroad.
This is the same story I've been hearing for a decade.
Yeah.
This is not new.
No.
This is how it's been forever.
And that's why the UK stock market is 20% smaller in terms of the number of companies on it than it was a decade ago. So it's been happening at pace.
No. That's enough of us being miserable, Will.
Yes, but I'm very optimistic.
Let me take you back to your Scottish roots, Will. Let me cheer you up. The first time I found out about you was when you became student president at Aberdeen University back in 1981. Back in the day. How much fun was that? I was a first-year law student at Aberdeen.
It was a very, very, very good students' union. We had a lot of great bands playing.
You had a lot of fun, I bet.
And I had a lot of fun doing it. And I'd been on the management committee of the students' union since 1977 when I went to university. And I learned a lot about business from doing it.
I suspect you did. A bit of moving and shaking.
Yeah, but we were running the Students' Union, and we had a manager, Brian, who was a dour Yorkshireman, and it was all brass, not muck, and it was all trying to get to understand the numbers, Will. And he taught me a lot, actually. And we had...
Did he think you were a good president or a pain in the ass?
He thought I was a mixture of the two, I think.
I think you're probably doing a good job then.
We made money when I was president. He particularly didn't like the presidents when they lost money that year, because if they lost money, it meant they had to go cap in hand to the university to keep the lights on in the Students' Union. The sad thing is Aberdeen doesn't have a Students' Union anymore. But I mean, I actually went on from that. I got a job. My father sadly passed away, partly from his war injuries in late 1980. And after I'd been Student Union president, I became a helicopter crewman for British Airways helicopters, which were then state-owned, working in the North Sea. And I learned a lot about... I was a trade union rep, so I learned a lot about how trade unions worked. I learned a lot about the travel business. I used to practice on all the Travicom systems that were in British Airways helicopters, which are the same ones BA had, to try and understand how they all worked. And then I got a graduate traineeship with Thomas Cook as a result. and then through the city and on to Virgin. So, I think everything in your life, I always say to kids who are leaving university now and worrying about getting jobs, I always say, just do something. Because if you're working McDonald's and you spend your time thinking about it as an education, learning how the systems work there, how does the income they get translate? How are they managing the product flow? How are the trucks coming in? How are they getting the orders in on time? You can learn so much. And an employer is really interested in that stuff. If you've done just stuff after university, it can really help you.
No, I couldn't agree more. You simply have to put yourself out there and soak it all in.
Exactly.
As a journalist, you have to have an interest in the world about you,
Yeah. I mean, I've always seen myself as a kind of journalist who kind of happened to end up actually working in business. Because I think about things, I must say, I think about things quite journalistically. Mm-hmm. And I think about them in terms of branding, reputation, marketing, combined with the idea of, if I was sleuthing this, what would I be really thinking about? Where if there's a story to be found, that means there's an investment opportunity. I see the two going hand in hand.
Hand in hand. Now, finally, a big question to end on. What are the big trends to look for in the space tech infrastructure industry? And I don't just mean Seraphim Space, because we've covered that fairly comprehensively. Where can retail investors make money in the next year or two? What are the next big trends in space tech?
I mean, the big opportunities will be in stuff that's private in the UK. I'm talking to a UK audience here. So there's going to be a myriad number of companies. I recently invested in one that's actually just closed its CIS. But it might come back again. But it might do a round which private investors can get in before it maybe goes public, called Oxford Space Systems. There's going to be lots more companies like that. You should look at them, hunt them down. Don't listen to their blurb. Listen to what the story that they're telling you about what they're actually doing and what they've got technologically tells you, and whether they've got the beginnings of customers. And that's one of the most important things. There are lots of great ideas out there, but do your research. And look at the trends that organizations like Seraphim are following. We do a monthly newsletter that anyone can sign up to get, which talks about the whole space industrial universe and what's going on.
That's a good idea.
That's a really good thing to read. It's not just about Seraphim, it's about other trends. And it tells you a lot about what's happening in the whole space investment world. It's stuff that you want to buy and stick away and forget about. And if you do that, I think you're not going to go wrong, because this is going to be the next industrial revolution.
Will Whitehorn, OBE, Chairman at Seraphim Space Investment Trust, ticker SSIT. Thank you so much for your insights on the global space industry. It has been a pleasure. Our next podcast interview is with Ian Lance, Fund Manager at Temple Bar Investment Trust, well-known investment trust. And for those watching, thank you very much indeed for your time. I'm here again with Sam Bell, CEO at Copia and Investor Summit co-founder, of course. Sam is the more experienced private investor, and as I'm always explaining, I'm learning the hard way. We're here to discuss the big investor moments of the week, none of which, of course, is investment advice. Well, how has the week gone then, Sam?
It's been nice and warm. Lots going on in the markets as well to keep us interested. And then brilliant interview, of course, with Will from Seraphim.
Brilliant.
Really interesting.
Simply outstanding.
Yeah, really interesting.
Yes. No, I'm so glad that he turned up and spoke with us. Space tech. Who knew that space tech was so interesting?
Who knew that Will was so interesting as well? I had to write some notes in the end. Of course, I knew this guy was the chair of the Seraphim Space Investment Trust, but to have worked at Virgin Galactic,
president of,
been in front of Congress. Well, I said I had to make notes. Literally got to write it down. There's so many things here.
Yeah, no, it's so
helps set up RAF Space Command. So, when Will's talking about this stuff, he's not coming from sleepy investment trust chair. He's walked the walk, talk the talk. Knows what he's talking about.
He's ahead of the curve.
Yeah.
He's ahead of the curve. And he is something at Napier University in Edinburgh as well.
Yes, yeah. I forget the term they use, but
A chancellor, I think.
Chancellor, that's it. Yeah.
What a man! What a man! He had some very interesting comments to make about SpaceX IPO, which is, of course, the IPO of the year.
Yeah, and that's tricky if you're running anything space related in the UK. Hype is always going to be a problem, right? So SpaceX comes in, floats at a high valuation, pops on the first day, second day, third day. At some point, things have to revert to the mean, and that drags everyone with them. So something like Seraphim, that's, I don't want to say slow and steady because it's exciting stuff, but where they're in, I think, as Will pointed out, invested in real companies. They're not doing launches that, you know, might explode on the runway's not the word. Launchpad is the word I'm looking for.
Launchpad, yeah.
They are investing in businesses that are actually making money from space. So it's a really, really interesting investment trust. So hopefully lots to learn for our viewers.
I couldn't agree more. Yes. And him actually meeting Elon before he became Elon, as it were, before he developed the character. He just said he was a very determined, but actually very modest and nice guy, which was fascinating.
Yeah, and it's important though as well to, like, for us as investors to remove the character from the business. You know, as great as Will was in that interview, we're not investing in Seraphim, for example, because Will tells a good story. We're looking at the balance sheets of the companies they're investing in, how good are the investments they're making, and so on. So you kind of got to do the same with SpaceX, I suppose, separate the hype and the man from what is the underlying business. Has it got a chance of making money in the next few decades, and so on? So that's the real question for investors.
25 billion in debt to repay 20 billion in debt, which is quite curious given that they raised 86 million, I think. It's 86 billion. So, I mean, the number has just become mind-boggling, really.
They do, but it's an expensive business to be in as well, isn't it? You know, launching a rocket, it's not cheap. And that's that's literally just the launch, not the development and all of the research that goes into that. But not necessarily winner takes all, but there will be very few winners who will take quite a lot of money from that industry. So
we'll put a little bit of a punt money into SpaceX. Did you have a little?
No, I know plenty of people who did, who, you know, took their money off the table over $200 and made 50% or whatever it was. But it's not for me. As much as I like a gamble, it's not for me.
You're not a tech investor?
No, not tech or space generally. That said, I've been in and out of Seraphim multiple times over the last few weeks. But it's at the valuation it is today, and, you know, I always hesitate because we don't give advice on this podcast. It is something that I have now bought and hold and am holding. But yeah, I buy and sell like as the wind blows. So if I think it's going up, I buy it. If I think it's going down, I'll sell.
Momentum? You're a momentum investor?
Momentum. And the reason momentum exists comes from the news cycle, you know. So SpaceX, as I mentioned, had a few good days, is going to come back closer to that flotation price. And it'll be the next news cycle that dictates where that goes. And that's news specifically on space, but also more generally people's optimism in the markets. So as some of these AI companies come to market, Anthropic and OpenAI, who are both looking at IPOs later this year or early next year, that will also have an effect on some of these more hype-driven companies.
So I was aware that the news cycle would be happening, so I actually used it as a moment to get out completely from Scottish Mortgage. So I sold my Scottish Mortgage holding, and I completely sold my Polar Capital AI holding.
Done well on those?
I've done fine, 26% and 29% up.
You're always telling me and our viewers, you know, what
how bad I am at this.
Yeah, well, both how bad you are at this, how cautious you are, but, you know, you're making 26% on two investments there.
Yes, it's so true. But yes, I'm cautious. I do so cautiously. I've taken everything off the table there, but I'm still in Stephen New's Blue Whale, which is up 40% at the moment.
Yeah, and in the lead up to these aforementioned IPOs of Anthropic and OpenAI, you know, you would hope that those would continue to do quite well.
Ah,
But,
interesting.
yeah, just getting out the right part of the cycle, right?
Exactly. And okay, time to talk Investor Summit.
Yeah.
We've had a cracking couple of weeks.
Brilliant. Couldn't be happier, right? We've basically sold out on the sponsors. We've filled our schedule. I think we've got one slot left that
No,
about eight people are vying over.
We've pulled in something equivalent to 50 speakers.
Yes, which is, a feat on its own just to manage the number. But the caliber of them is absolutely brilliant. People from the FCA, some big brokers, investment trusts, journalists. If you wrote down, had you written down 6 months ago your dream list of speakers?
Yes. Who will we have speaking?
I think most of them we've ticked the box.
I'm gonna give a special shout out to Ben Rogoff. He's the man whose fund I've just sold. We've got Ben Rogoff, fund manager, the top man at Polo Capital AI.
So perhaps in September he can convince you to reinvest.
Well, he probably will. I'm quite susceptible
if
that
you've
way.
Not already done so by then.
I'm quite susceptible to a good pitch.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely astounding. So we've got two stalls to be sold, and everything else is gone.
Yeah, which 3 months before the event, couldn't have even imagined a few months ago. So very pleased.
With one thing we need to do, sell some tickets, right?
Yes, yeah, of course. We've got these great speakers, sponsors who'd like some people in the room. So that's our next task.
We need a great audience.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what does it say here? Talking points of the week. What else was of interest to you?
I'm going to plug another event very quickly that I'm doing the week before. So every 6 months or so, I run these events at Mansion House for the Lord Mayor or Lady Mayor, as it is at the moment. And picking up on something Will said, a lot of this technology that's out there at the moment is actually dual use. Dual use legitimately, as in, it has an industrial use and it has a military use. Some people use that term just so they don't have to say defense. But at Mansion House on the, I think it's 9th of September, we're running a dual use technology event. So we've got 18 companies pitching, lots of big venture capitalists in the room as well, VC firms. So it's going to be a hot sector regardless. Everyone wants in on this stuff, and space tech is a really important part of that because the future of the military and defense is going to happen in space.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
Undoubtedly. And if you don't understand that or believe that, then you're in the wrong job.
Yeah.
Talking of defense, obliquely, the Iran war appears to be over. But no one's told Benjamin Netanyahu.
Yeah, without straying too deeply into politics here, there's probably a set of people in the US making a lot of money on these announcements that the war's over, that the Strait of Hormuz is shut again, that it's open again, it's closed again, and so on, which makes our lives as investors really very difficult. The beginning of the war, your stocks were living and dying on whether the strait was open or not, because many companies behind these stocks are big energy users, and of course oil is where a lot of that comes from. So the strait being closed had a big knock-on effect. Now, they could announce tomorrow morning that the war's over, or that the war's back on again in full swing, and I don't think things are going to move more than a couple of %.
Yeah.
I think people are tired of the story.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Yes. No, my portfolio has sort of recovered from where it was, so I'm happy. Let's end on a high note, a positive. Yeah. We both attended Mello, the London Mello, and had a great time, didn't we?
Those guys do a real service to the investor community, getting, how many do they have? 20, 30, 40 companies there across a couple of days. Explaining what those companies do, hundreds of people, 300-400 people in the room. I know, there's a real fan base for Mello. Lots of our friends and contacts go there. So brilliant to see that they're just, taking it from strength to strength.
Going from strength to strength. And more than that, we both attended and both had a really good time.
Yeah,
so
really
be entirely selfish about it. We both had a good time and met really interesting people, didn't we?
Yeah. And so long may it continue. I wish all the best for those guys, and maybe we can even work with them in future. Who knows?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's it for now, Sam. As ever, we've only got a limited amount of time, and that's it. It's always good to catch up with you. Thank you, as ever, to everyone for watching, and have a good day.
Do please take note, the views expressed in the Investor Summit Green Room podcast are for information purposes only, and nothing in this podcast constitutes a financial promotion, investment advice, or indeed personal recommendation.
This Investor Summit Green Room podcast is produced by Copia, creators of investor events, video, and websites. If you've enjoyed our monthly podcast, please do subscribe on YouTube or follow us on your own podcast platform. And of course, we'd love to